Hello everyone, this is Serious Trivia, and today we're continuing the 5 Elites of Wei Let's Talk Lore series with episode 8 of Zhang Liao's arc titled Zhang Liao's Legacy. Now last time we ended as Sun Quan and his mighty army of 100,000 strong turned tail and sailed home, wounded and embarrassed. Zhang Liao's very name would become something mothers of the south would end up telling their crying babies to scare them straight at night. For the victors, rewards were on their way, as Cao Cao would personally come to Hefei in mid-216, immediately after wrapping up a successful Hanzhong campaign that saw the surrender of Zhang Lu. Once at Hefei, Cao Cao would inspect the very battlegrounds where Zhang Liao achieved the impossible, as even Cao Cao could not stop heaping praise on Zhang Liao. Naturally, Zhang Liao would end up being promoted, this time to the position of general who conquers the east, or Zhengdong Jiangjun, and to prevent another undermanned campaign in the future, more troops were given for Zhang Liao to command. Furthermore, in the winter of 216, Cao Cao started to pull troops at the forward port of Juchao, as all signs pointed towards a spring counteroffensive against Sun Quan to return the favor of Sun Quan's attack on Hefei. And by February of 217, Cao Cao would lead a force headlined by generals Zhang Liao, Cao Ren, and Xiahou Dun, as the Wei forces would quickly overrun the Wu position at Ruxu. And by March, just a month later, Sun Quan was forced to send an envoy led by official Xu Xiang to discuss surrender terms in order to get Cao Cao to end the campaign. Cao Cao would end up taking the win as he would return to Ye, while Xiahou Dun, Cao Ren, and Zhang Liao would all remain behind at Juchao, remaining ready for any future conflicts. However, the hostility between Cao Cao and Sun Quan would come to a temporary end, as Liu Bei would surprisingly become a common enemy for both Cao Cao and Sun Quan following a successful Hanzhong campaign that saw the death of one of Cao Cao's most trusted generals in Xiahou Yuan. For Sun Quan, Liu Bei's success was viewed with jealousy and concern, as ultimately Liu Bei's goal was to restore the Han. And if that was to happen, then Sun Quan would either have to submit to Liu Bei as a faithful servant of the Han, or be taken out as a rebellious regional warlord. And naturally, Sun Quan, who now has grown accustomed to life as an independent regional ruler, would not have liked either outcome. So as the saying goes, the enemy of my enemy is now my friend. And thus in 219, just as Guan Yu was attacking the city of Fan in northern Jin province, Sun Quan approached Cao Cao to offer his vassalage and an attack on Guan Yu's rear. Elated by this development, especially given the amount of pressure Guan Yu was applying to Fan, Cao Cao accepted Sun Quan's offer, and in a demonstration of goodwill and trust for this new relationship, both Zhang Liao and Xiahou Dun were instructed to pull their Hefei garrisons and march west towards the Jin province. And for those wondering, Cao Ren, who was also previously garrisoned at Hefei after the 217 campaign, had actually already moved to Xiangyang the year prior and was currently engaged with Guan Yu. Now, Zhang Liao's unit would actually never make it to the Jin province to relieve Cao Ren, because before they would arrive, Xu Huang's reinforcement had already successfully repelled Guan Yu. So instead, Zhang Liao marched north to Mo Bei to join with Cao Cao's main army there. This would also be the last meeting between Zhang Liao and Cao Cao, as after this brief reunion, Cao Cao would order Zhang Liao to garrison at Chen, while Cao Cao himself would return to Luoyang, where he would die soon after in the spring of 220. And immediately after Cao Cao's death, Cao Pi would end up inheriting the title of Prince of Wei, and promotions would be given to the entire court. Zhang Liao would end up going from general who conquers the east to general of the front, and even Zhang Liao's older brother, Zhang Xun, who had not held any position prior, ended up with a minor nobility title for his relationship to Zhang Liao. Furthermore, aside from title changes, Zhang Liao was gifted thousands of yards of linen and multiple tonnage of grain to ensure his loyal service for the new regime. Another side effect of Cao Cao's sudden death was Sun Quan's rebellion, as the temporary vassalage agreement was quickly torn up, and in response, Cao Pi would order Zhang Liao back to Hefei. And to highlight how much he valued Zhang Liao, Cao Pi elevated Zhang Liao's existing nobility title while also allowing Zhang Liao's family, including his elderly mother, to accompany him to Hefei. Furthermore, Cao Pi had sent an imperial carriage for Zhang Liao's mother, as well as ordering all officials on the way to Hefei to greet Zhang Liao's family with grand parades as they passed by. Later on in 220, when Cao Pi would end up usurping the Han and becoming the Emperor of Wei, Zhang Liao was promoted once again to the Marquis title of Jinyang or Jinyang Hou, as another 1,000 household of tax revenue was allocated to his title land, giving Zhang Liao a grand total of 2,600 household worth of tax income as his annual stipend. Now, with Zhang Liao back in Hefei, Sun Quan did not dare to attack, especially when it also became apparent that Liu Bei was now preparing for a campaign out west to avenge Guan Yu's death. So in 221, Zhang Liao actually had the chance to return to the new capital city of Luoyang to officially meet with his new emperor Cao Pi. Of course, the two of them had met numerous times before, as Cao Pi grew up within Cao Cao's war camps, but this would be the first meeting between the two as an emperor and subject. And during this meeting, Cao Pi mainly asked about the events of the Battle of Hefei, as he would end up comparing Zhang Liao to the famed Western Zhou dynasty general Zhao Hu, whose main accomplishment was the conquest of the Huainan region. Survivors of Zhang Liao's famous 800-man charge were also all given promotions to become Cao Pi's Imperial Tiger Guards, and because Luoyang was still being rebuilt at the time, with multiple massive new palace projects going on, Cao Pi also offered to use the royal architect to help build Zhang Liao a family residence in the new capital, so that Zhang Liao's elderly mother can live out her days comfortably. After this meeting, Zhang Liao did not return back to Hefei right away, as Cao Pi instead sent him to garrison at the nearby city of Yongqiu. Now, this decision was politically motivated, as Sun Quan once again submitted himself to the new Wei regime as a vassal in order to gain support against Liu Bei, who was now marching on Sun Quan's doorsteps out west in the Yilin campaign. Unfortunately, this would not be a break for Zhang Liao, as his long years of military service, which no doubt left him with many wounds, was finally starting to catch up to him, as he would end up falling severely ill while garrisoned at Yongqiu. Upon hearing this, Cao Pi immediately sent his imperial attendant Liu Ye and the royal physicians to tend to Zhang Liao's illness, and with many of the imperial tiger guards in the palace now being former retinues of Zhang Liao, the practice of asking about Zhang Liao's health became a popular trend within the imperial palace. As Zhang Liao's illness lingered on, Cao Pi himself even got involved, as he would personally visit Yongqiu, where he had Zhang Liao dress, dine, and rest by his side, until Zhang Liao finally started to show some signs of recovery. Yet there would be no rest for the weary, as Sun Quan would once again break his vassalage as soon as Liu Bei was defeated at Yilin. So to punish Sun Quan for his repeated transgressions, Cao Pi would personally lead a campaign against Sun Quan in 222, and this meant Zhang Liao was once again returning to Hefei. However, by this time, Zhang Liao was no longer in charge of the Eastern Front, as Cao Xiu was the new general who conquers the East, and technically, Zhang Liao's new boss for this campaign. And instead of fighting a defensive battle around Hefei, the new approach was an attack from the Guangning Commandery, which was directly north of Sun Quan's capital at Jianye. However, once again, the mighty Yangtze River would divide the two sides, but unlike the fateful Battle of Chibi, a gust of violent but favorable winds would actually end up blowing a portion of Sun Quan's navies, led by Lu Fan, north towards the Wei encampment. And once these ships crashed ashore, General Zhang Liao and Prefect Wang Ling made quick work of the unlucky shipwrecked troops, as this early victory gave the Wei forces the confidence to sail south across the Yangtze River. Unfortunately, the attack south, led by Zhan Ba, would end up failing, and with Cao Ren's army stalling out on the central front, Cao Pi eventually called off the whole campaign. For Zhang Liao, this campaign would also be his last, as not long after his final victory over Sun Quan, Zhang Liao would succumb to his lingering illness and die at the age of 54. Upon hearing the news, Cao Pi wept for the loss of Zhang Liao, as Zhang Liao would go on to earn the posthumous Temple Marquis title of Gang Hou, symbolizing his strength as a general. Zhang Liao's son, Zhang Hu, would inherit Zhang Liao's titles and eventually end up as the lieutenant general in the Wei army. In terms of historical legacy, Zhang Liao's achievements would be well recognized even by later dynasties, as he would end up on the top 64 list of historical generals created by the Tang Dynasty court in 782, as well as the top 72 historical generals created by the Song Dynasty in 1123. And with that, our series on Zhang Liao is now complete. Next time when we return, we will shift our focus to Yue Jin as the next general in our series on the 5 elites of Wei. Hopefully you all have enjoyed this episode enough to consider subscribing to the channel for more content on Three Kingdoms history, or simply support the channel by leaving a comment below or just by hitting the like button. And as always, I'll see you all next time. Bye!